Chapter 18, Passing into the Beyond. At breakfast the next day a voice said,
Eat nothing, drink nothing.
So, the breakfast remained untasted, while I wondered at a command so strangely at variance with all mundane requirements. My obedience caused a veritable storm of protest from those interested in my physical welfare. When my fiancé came in the evening and remonstrated, I was strongly tempted to confess all, but when this temptation was strongest, I remembered a motto hanging over his desk: "The head that is loaded with wisdom does not leak at the mouth," and refrained, realizing that my confession might be productive of more harm than good. I thus forced him to place his own construction on what appeared to be obstinate foolishness on my part. The finest wines, delicacies, and fruits were brought to me only to be carried away. I really did not want them, as I was neither hungry nor thirsty. In some splendidly beautiful way, I was protected against the physical inconvenience and distress that otherwise would have attended so complete a fast. It was then I felt most keenly the responsibility of living in two worlds, each exacting its obligations. To the requirements of the forces of earth, the invisible would not concede an inch, and so between the two I was unhappily suspended, an intermundane creature, of neither world yet in both. I bore it all as patiently as I could, realizing that those interested in me were drawing as heavily on the bank of patience as I was, and so tried to impress upon them my appreciation of the kindness of their intentions. They were toiling blindly in the darkness, but I was moving toward the beacon light beyond the darkness, in unison with something they could not understand. On the third day, my beloved came in the evening with a look of determination on his face, and, after seating himself, came characteristically straight to the point.
I have never before asked favor of God, man or devil, but I do ask you to be reasonable and to conform to the recognized requirements of life.
Oh, dear, please let's talk of something else, I pleaded, but he continued until he had said every word he intended and concluded by asking pointedly.
Will you?
No, I replied, feeling that I had affixed my signature to my death warrant. He drew himself up with a sorrowful expression on his face and resentment in his eyes, and refrained from further comment on the subject. I felt like screaming, to relieve the tenseness of the silence that had settled down upon us. When it seemed I could not endure it another moment, I said with pleading in my soul, whether it was in my voice or not. Talk to me, dear. Tell me something that has happened today.
Nothing has happened.
He answered, looking straight ahead. Don't worry about me, I ventured, and added, can't you see that I am better?
Nonsense.
He replied almost irritably, taking further refuge in the silence that so oppressed me. I tried desperately to escape the influence of the oppressive silence, but it was impossible. Then the tenseness began to give way, something seemed to snap, I was sinking, going out beyond the depression, beyond the range of argument. Observing this, he turned to me calling,
Fanny, Fanny?
Which I heard without the ability to respond. He took my cold hand, felt the pulse, and turned to the nurse.
Wine, please.
When she came with the wine, he lifted my head and tried to pour it into my mouth, but obedient to the force that dominated me, I turned my face away. The wine stained the white pillow without a drop going into my mouth. This was too much. I saw his face almost convulsed with annoyance, which he restrained with a visible effort, as he set the glass down with precision, bade me an icicle-fringed good night, and left the house. In semi-consciousness I listened to his retreating footsteps, all the time hoping that he would relent and come back, but when I heard the gate click with more emphasis than usual, I knew my wishing was in vain. That icy good night seemed a living thing which tantalized and chilled me, making me feel like calling him back to explain to him, regardless of consequences, that my change of attitude was not a change of heart. This I wanted to tell him before the cold hand that lingered near touched me with the silence that would forbid the telling of what I felt he should know.
Fanny.
Interrupted a voice from the invisible. I whispered, hush, let me hold my love to my heart for the last time, and then.
Why the last time?
I will soon be in another world.
You have been taught that love does not suffer by the transition from world to world.
So I have, I admitted more to myself than to the voice. Then I heard the nurse creep quietly into bed as though she fancied me asleep. Soon I heard her sigh, the sigh of weariness born of her unavailing efforts to tempt me from an allegiance she could not understand. That she soon slept was evidenced by a voice that said solemnly,
She is asleep and cannot wake until she is freed.
I had felt no concern as to whether she slept or not, until this assertion made me wonder why her sleeping was required. As far as I was concerned, the distressing happenings of the evening had a murdered sleep. Also, it was Tuesday night, with the hand of fate pointing toward the end of uncertainty. Yes, I mentally admitted, this is Tuesday night and there will be no more.
Yes.
Echoed a voice.
But other Tuesday nights have found you equally assured.
This had a dampening effect on my assurance, but a rousing effect on my resentment. The thought of another week without the strength to endure it appalled me. Weak though I was, I sat up in bed and looked out the window, on the soft moonlit night, felt the Gulf breezes on my already cold face and shivered. Oh, the wretchedness of it all. Weak and trembling I sat huddled up, with my arms about my knees, reviewing the events of the agonizing weeks that had passed, feeling a new resentment that this strange, strong force held me, making a plaything of my earnestness, causing me to wound and annoy those who loved me and whose love I cherished, holding me in the weak subjective condition of semi-illness, causing me to act as directed, with all the earnestness of my soul, only to be rewarded with deception and disappointment. I could not reconcile the events leading up to this night with the continuation of mundane existence. When I thought of the irony of the voice, my very soul cried out in darkness. Why can't you be fair with me? Out of the stillness came a calm voice in rebuke.
Can you not yet discern between truth and deception?
Forgive me, I whispered, contritely, you know how weary I am. A flood of joy burst upon me, and again the controlling power held me passive. Slowly I turned, adjusted the pillows, arranged my night clothing comfortably, shook my hair loose, pushed the covers away so they would not touch me, and lay down, first in one position, then in another, in a vain effort to get comfortable. As a soft hand pressed my forehead and caressed my hair, a voice said tenderly,
Remember the light beyond the darkness.
Yes, the beacon light beyond Gethsemane, and I seemed to see it again, nearer and more luminous than before.
Peace be thine.
Came like a benediction, falling on the soft stillness, all weariness was gone, and my soul was bathing itself in the flood tide of resignation as I whispered. I am thine, O God, do with me as thou wilt, and closing my eyes in a resignation that was absolute, I realized that I was very cold, with a coldness that held my hands and feet numb within its icy embrace. Then chilly waves touched my heart, slowing its pace. Little lights like miniature stars rose in the white cloud firmament that had formed in the room, the tiniest electric flashes, blue-tinged, came and went, waves of soft variegated colors, undulating amid the whiteness, were spreading themselves into delicate tints. The air was perceptibly charged with electricity, the room vibrant with it, and I was conscious of almost imperceptible shocks, which gave an apprehensive feeling lest a real shock come. Then what seemed little detached electric lights illuminated the whiteness in a most weird and fantastic manner, during which time the shocks became quite distinct. Then into the electrified whiteness came forms and faces of ethereal, light-emitting, self-illuminating beings wrapped in ever-moving silvery vapor that tinted everything with silver. White, transparent hands appeared only to hide themselves again within the mist, where faces, ever-changing, were coming and going. Floating within the silvery mist were the faces of my parents. Lillian was there, too, with her happy, smiling face, near enough for me to touch. There came others I had known in the earth life, smiling in welcome recognition. Dream faces came and went, and voices chanted in harmony with the choir invisible, while I felt a conscious at oneness with the manifestations which surrounded me. Then slowly there came down an unconfined electric-laden lightness, which spread over me, touching me at first cautiously and lightly with an undulating movement, which caused perceptible shocks. It would touch me and draw away when the shocks became too pronounced, only to return and repeat the process again and again until finally the shocks were no longer perceptible, and I had the sensation of being a part of them, of being electrified, as it were. Then with a vibrating, quivering movement it spread itself over my body, enveloping me entirely, holding me within itself, as it settled down with a suggestion of permanency. It was with considerable wonder I tried to analyze this strange scintillating, vital, living essence. It was a live thing without any sign of life. I could see it without seeing it, feel it without feeling it. As it held me in its magnetized embrace, it gave the impression of the very essence of power, occupying unlimited space, interpenetrating all things indefinable yet holding all things subject to its law. It was a kind of white fire, but without the faintest suggestion of fire as we know it. Can this wonderful, this beautiful thing be death? It is birth, there is no death. Voices chanted back and in unison with these musical voices, I joined in, it is birth. There is no death, which lifted my soul higher and higher in wonderful realization. I knew it was what we term death, the separation of the soul and body, that which we look upon as something horrible, a thing to be avoided at all costs and as long as possible. Yet I held it to me as the most wonderful and beautiful experience that life had ever given me. I knew I was going out, drifting out over the borderland, through the channel of death unto the sea of life everlasting, which is supposed to give up its mysteries only to those who sail upon its waters. I could feel my blood turning cold, could feel the physical body growing heavy and still. There was not even a suggestion of pain. Then I was conscious of something moving, something struggling within, and knew it was that a shadow of body struggling for release, the soul freeing itself from its prison of flesh. Little lapses of consciousness came and went as the shadow body adjusted and readjusted its sails and helm in conformity with the beacon light ahead, as the shore it was leaving became dimmer and dimmer. Suddenly it stopped upon the still waters of the channel, and as seabird to its mate, it called to a loved one who remained on the darkening shore, "Goodbye, my love." While lingering in regret that the voice could not span the distance between them, the beloved face seemed to come and mingle with the dream faces within the silvery mist, just as though it were one of them instead of a human being in the earth life. Again, the magic word, "goodbye," was whispered, and the departing soul then renewed its struggles against the tides of the receding shore, with eyes fixed on the beacon light beyond the dark channel. Night began, casting shadows before, hiding the dream faces, obscuring the lights, hushing the music. Then suddenly came an impact in the right side, defined but painless, causing a perceptible start. The night was come, it was dark, so dark, I was alone on the mystic sea of the silence. Welcome to death, if thou, O death, a being art, draw near. And let me clasp thee, for I hold thee dear. I shall extract eternal life from thee. Thou canst but snatch this worn-out dress from me. Chapter 19, Over the Borderland. It was very dark and I was wondering where the dream faces had gone, where the lights were, in fact, what had happened. In my perplexity I began casting vaguely about, but there was nothing to touch. It was all space, just empty space, and the bed, where was it? It dawned upon me that I was suspended somewhere, somehow, and from that base I began trying to make observations. All about and above me I could see nothing, but fancy my astonishment if you can, when looking down, I saw my body resting peacefully on the bed, representing what is commonly called a dead person. I could not move my eyes from it, it fascinated me as it lay in the cold whiteness, robed in a gown of lavender silk, with dainty laces and ruffles. The neck and arms were bare, as were the feet, the hair lay loose and disheveled, with little brown curls on the white forehead. The deep blue windows of the soul, the eyes, were at half-mast, the soul being absent, the light was gone, the lips, slightly parted, wore just a suggestion of a smile, the left hand rested lightly on the breast, the engagement ring scintillating as brightly as ever, the right, which no doubt had been lifted unconsciously at the shock of impact, had fallen a little apart from the body and lay, palm upturned. How peaceful it looked! Thus, every detail of the clay image fastened itself upon my consideration as I viewed it dispassionately, realizing that it was a cast-off garment for which I had no further use. However, I felt a protective kindliness toward it. It had been a faithful servant, executing my every wish and whim, and now that I had passed beyond the range of its services, it pleased my fancy to robe it in the white, pearl-bedecked dress, the wearing of which had meant so much to me in quite a different way. A disturbing thought obtruded itself, how differently he would look upon that which I was contemplating with complacency. This changed the focus of my interest, and I turned my eyes away in the darkness, with the desire heavy upon me to go to him and let him know that I still lived, that it was not all of life to live nor all of death to die, that the passage across the dark channel intensifies rather than abates love. As though responding to my thought, I felt myself moving, or being propelled by a vibratory sensation. It seemed to last but a moment. Then I stopped and, instinctively looking down, I saw sleeping beneath me the object of my solicitude. As I looked upon him, I saw the shadow body more distinctly than the physical. Viewed from the other side of life, the shadow body seemed the original and the physical the duplicate, the soul the real, the body the unreal. Within and interpenetrating all was a light, which I had not before perceived as being a part of the spiritual anatomy. This light penetrated from within, both the shadow and physical bodies, maintaining through and about the body an aura or illumination which enveloped it, clothing it, as it were, in a magnetized illumination. How wonderful this three-in-one life manifestation seemed, especially when we generally recognize only the one, the physical. Some way, how different he seemed. It was like a mental vivisection. Yet the difference of viewpoint was the only difference, I concluded, as I moved a little nearer and called low so that I might not startle him from his slumber. "Dearest, I am here," I said mentally, in the very same way that I had conversed with the invisibles before my transition, but he slept on. His soul, which was not sleeping, responded joyously and tried to help me pass the perception of my presence into his physical consciousness. He moaned and turned restlessly in his sleep, as I called to him again and again. Then in a disturbed way, he moved and called out.
"Fanny, Fanny?"
As wide awake he sat up in bed, and said.
"Such dreams, I dreamed she was dead."
So, he had really heard without recognizing it. Now that he was awake, I came yet a little nearer, confident that he would see and hear me, for I stood very near him and called softly, "I am here, dear," but he only seemed more restless and sighed more deeply. Then with nervous impatience he turned on the light, reached for his glasses and a magazine which were on the stand beside his bed, muttering,
"Such a night, no rest, no sleep."
He was thinking sorrowfully of the possibility of my death as he adjusted his glasses, turned one of the pillows on end to make his head higher, and settled down to read, despite the fact that I stood near, calling to him, charging the very atmosphere with sentiment and eagerness. In a hurt way I drew back, and suddenly, as though for the first time, the full realization came upon me, and in an odd way, I whispered to myself, "I am dead, that is why he cannot hear and see me," and yet I felt more alive than I had ever felt. I was the same person in every way. There was something pitiably painful about being so near one beloved, seeing him plainly and hearing him distinctly, even knowing that he was thinking of me, and yet having him utterly ignore my presence, and above all knowing that he would never recognize me again, never hear my voice no matter how ardently I called, while I was the same in every way minus the physical body. Then I fell to wondering why he could not hear or see me, and perceived that the vibratory environment in which I was held did not harmonize with that which encompassed him, yet touched so intimately that, even as I watched, I hoped for a harmonious blending of these vibratory waves, which gave the impression of a cross-currents in the sea. Mine was the vibration of perpetual motion, his more like a dead sea, into which these vibratory currents ebbed and flowed. And it seemed such an easy matter to move out of the deadness into the ebb and flow, that I waited and watched a long time before I realized that he would make no effort to do so. With this realization full upon me, I looked at him calmly, without expecting him to see or to hear, acknowledging that my mission had failed and wishing that I could explain it all to him. Looking down into his troubled face, I moved a little nearer and called to him again without expecting any response. "Au revoir, my love, until we meet again." Then with a strange soul sadness I turned away and would have moved on when I perceived the vibratory force was holding me, steadily restraining any further movement. I began to wonder and to chide myself for mundane interests beyond which I realized I had passed. Persistently the force held me, as though inviting me to further consideration of earth interests, but I had none. My material possessions were disposed of as I desired, there was no life work I was leaving incomplete, I had no children. No one depending on me, nothing held me to the earth. My desire had been to go beyond it, and now that I had done so, I was well pleased and wanted to go on to the joys I felt awaited me beyond the influence of the earth. Yet the force held me, try as I would to pass beyond it, until, instead of struggling against it, I tried to understand it, to wrest from it its reason for thus detaining me, feeling that there must be some reason for such marked persistence. Almost instantly the lesson sank into my consciousness, and I realized that the long arm of mundane interests can reach into the beyond, and hold its victims within the shadow of earth, pitting its magnetism against the promise of higher things. Then I was moving easily in an undulating way, within the propelling vibration, and when I stopped darkness enveloped me, not a sight nor a sound, just oppressive heavy darkness, with the sensation of being alone in eternity weighing heavily upon me, as I waited in awesome uncertainty. At first this darkness was appalling, the silence oppressive, but I was not long in perceiving that this, too, had its part to play in the great scheme of things, as I could feel a wonderful, new strength manifesting within me. My sight grew, until it overcame the darkness and I perceived that I was not alone nor was it dark, That the darkness had been within me and could be eliminated only from within. There were loved ones and many others welcoming me and rejoicing that I was with them. Mian also was there, at which I rejoiced exceedingly, feeling vaguely that where he was there could be no uncertainty. How carefree and light I felt. Again came that indescribable sensation of being held within that electric-laden, living light that had come upon and enveloped me just before my transition. It now gave the impression of a kind of invisible, living elevator. It was still holding me within itself with all of its electrified, weird, vibratory power, and I wondered that it was no longer a light. As I wondered, it emitted a faint blue-tinged illumination, giving the impression that it was a light, only as it elected, or occasion required. As I quivered within the strangeness of it all, Mian fastened his dark, luminous eyes upon me, and asked solemnly,
"And having come, whither goest thou?"
Rather a disturbing question, one must admit, when I was trying to adjust myself to the condition of having come. And now I was to go? I remember feeling that if he did not know any more about it than I did, we were in a more deplorable plight than the babes in the woods. As I deliberated, not altogether pleased at assuming such a colossal responsibility, Mian, knowing my thoughts, interrupted.
"Weaver of thy freedom, choose."
Again, that phrase. It had followed me even into eternity, which fact I half resented, but since I was confronted with choosing my destiny, in a world of which I knew nothing, and since hope had painted beautiful and alluring pictures of a soul's ideal, feeling that the time had come for ideals to become real, I cried out in exultation. To the very highest heaven.
"That is well."
He made answer evenly, as the electrified vibrations began manifesting, and he stood in a listening attitude which I simulated. In a moment I distinctly heard the word "come," and with a soft, bluish light playing about and enveloping us, we floated out on the undulating waves of space. Chapter 20: The Red Darkness. As we floated, I noted that the vibratory waves by which we were propelled were not unlike those which had propelled my hand to write independently of my direction, and realized that the same power was, in like manner, propelling my body through space. And so we went on, until I could see fringing the darkness red light, or rather a red darkness, which held my attention until we came within it, when the sensation of being among many excluded all other considerations. I was listening, trying to hear what they were saying, but the vibrations were evidently not in harmony, so I could not hear distinctly, and after a long time of vain effort I turned to Mian and asked, "What place is this?"
"Let perception be your teacher."
He replied curtly. "Tell me, please," I persisted, with increasing interest.
"Ask no questions, that which is for you to know will be given without asking."
Thus rebuked, I took refuge in silence. Then, surely I was mistaken, it was only fancy, a horrible fancy, those agonizing groans and cries. But slowly a terrible knowledge sifted into my consciousness. I knew what a burdensome thing memory could be, and listening carefully I learned many other things from the environment about me. "Are we near the earth?" I asked, feeling convinced that we were.
"Yes, within its magnetism or spiritual gravitation."
"Why are these beings detained here?"
"They are not detained. Some desire it, while others are not yet strong enough to progress beyond it.
"Why?"
Earth's interests hold them."
I would have questioned further, but remembered what Mian had said and restrained myself, feeling grateful for the information that he had given and turning again to perception as my teacher. As I listened discriminatingly, I heard cries of the might have been, of lives wasted in the making, of derelicts, tossed by the waves of circumstances, of those who had failed creatures depending on them, cries of vengeance unexecuted, of vengeance executed, of crimes unpardonable and unpardoned, earth ties of weakness, a consuming love of earth, and the pleasures thereof, of those who wanted to go back, if only for an hour, to right wrongs they had fastened upon some earth being, of those who were afraid to go on, and wanted to come back. Horrible to listen to and pitiful to contemplate. There was no bar to their going on, but they did not want to, some did not know they could. It was the earth that attracted them, the earth that held them, they felt they could not give up the earth life. So intimately was the connection between this place and the earth that I could hear living, loving human beings of earth, because of these invisible influences, crying out in their anguish in a hopeless way, could hear them saying, "Earth is hell, earth is hell," as they suffered on without knowing the cause. In this dark earth-magnetized region, Disembodied spirits live the mundane existence much as the psychic lives the spiritual while yet in the mundane. One is progression, the other retrogression. Disembodied spirits living the mundane life do so at the expense of human beings in the earth life, while the mundane person living the spiritual life is obeying the law of evolution and progression. It is this condition which requires discrimination on the part of the investigator. I heard the voices, felt the touches of these derelicts, outcasts and fallen creatures of the spirit world, and my heart cried out in pity for them as I wondered if this condition was permanent, or by what process this spiritual blindness was treated. As I wondered, my perception quickened, enlarging my spiritual vision, and I saw descending into the redness spirits of love and mercy, illuminating the way as they came down, calling as they came, and while all of the submerged had not yet acquired spiritual hearing, some had, and I could hear an occasional answering voice, struggling up from the vortex, "I am coming," and I knew that some were passing beyond it. Also, I was given to know what a powerful influence earth beings could exert in sending them on their journey, instead of permitting them to exercise influence and propensities at their expense. Then and there I wanted to tell the suffering, toiling creatures of earth that they were not compelled to submit to such influences, that no matter how strong the influence of evil is, the God principle incorporated within every human being is stronger, making us superior to all other forces. If we could only recognize this within ourselves, this divine essence that makes us one with the source of all life, power and infinitude, we could not only free our souls from uncertainty, our bodies from disease, plague, madness, murders and unhappiness, but could help these souls of darkness to turn toward the light, into the vibratory waves of progression, and realize that knowledge is the wings wherewith we fly to heaven. The one thing I would like to impress upon everyone is there is no soul irretrievably lost, no matter how many eons it may remain in darkness, and long and many are the journeys some make before the light of truth floods their consciousness. As I was vibrating about, trying to learn all I could of the place, I became aware that souls were passing on, going beyond this red darkness, and I, in turn, was filled with a desire to pass beyond it. Then came a chilling fear, horror of horrors. Was this my destination? Mian relieved my suspense promptly.
Did not the Christ descend into this place before his ascension?
The word hell intruded itself upon my consciousness, although there was nothing suggestive of the orthodox hell of fire and brimstone. It was red but certainly not fire, nor did it have any of the attributes of fire. I could not shake off the conviction that it was hell nonetheless, made up of souls who, while on earth, had been so entirely dominated by the flesh, that the separation from that domination caused them in their very soul weakness to look back upon the physical as a thing superior to themselves. Feeling assured that I was not to remain in this environment, I went boldly further into the darkness, as if to wrest every secret from it, but I had not gone far when a voice from the very depths arrested me and I fell back listening, and a voice unlike any I had yet heard was saying,
"Earth's sins gave this place existence. Earth's magnetism maintains it."
Somehow, I did not care to penetrate any further and grew retrospective. Descended into hell kept recurring to me until it became my theme of thought. I remembered, a memory not altogether pleasant just then, that had been one of my stock and, according to my version, most effective arguments against the existence of the Christ. I recalled the number of gods or Christs that according to theological history, and mythological, had descended into hell and risen again the third day. There were Krishna, the Hindu god, Zoroaster, the Persian god, Osiris, Egyptian god, Baldur, Scandinavian god, Quetzalcoatl, Mexican god, as well as the virgin-born saviors Horus, Adonis, Bacchus, Hercules and Mercury, the Word and Messenger of God. Many Christs in many different religions. There was the beautiful story of Lord Buddha. Mian interrupted gently.
To all nations has been given their ideal man, their teacher, as an example of man's possibilities. One for the whole world will now suffice, but, when these ideals came, nations knew less of each other than they did of God.
What a difference one's viewpoint can make of the same circumstances. In the Christ argument, that which had been the ultimate in the negative now occupied the same position in the affirmative. As I pondered over these things, I felt myself again within the vibratory propelling force and heard the word, "Come." I regret a sense of duty compels me to incorporate within a book the undesirable condition just described. I would choose, were the choice mine, to embody only that which is beautiful and uplifting. Personally, I have always opposed the theory of evil, believing with Shakespeare, nothing is evil, but thinking makes it so. But in our daily lives, when we face facts instead of theories, we know that evil, call it what you will, that which is disagreeable to us, exists, regardless of what our theories may or may not be. We admit that evil has no power, except what we give it. And yet we know that every day we cope with something that tries to tear us away from our ideals and standards of life, making us realize that the post of honor is a private station, while we go on living our double lives, the lives we intend to live and the lives we really live.